Hello, my name is Mairi Spowage and I'm doing one of a series of interviews with our keynote speakers at the ESCoE Conference 2022. I'm delighted to say I'm joined today by Professor Michael Pollitt, who's a Professor of Business Economics at the Cambridge Judge Business School. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, nice to be here.
So you've just delivered your speech to the conference about the green economy and the path to net zero, focusing particularly on the productivity implications of the sort of drive to net zero. So could you just set out what the main issues are that the drive to net zero might have on the measurement of productivity?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think productivity is about outputs relative to inputs, and the issue with net zero is that certainly in the energy sector itself, we would expect outputs to decline and inputs to go up. So that sounds immediately challenging for productivity. So one of the issues is that underlying effect of both the drive for energy efficiency and also the need to put more capital into the energy sector. And the other issue is, well, how do we value some of the wider environmental or quality of service aspects of the energy system and the impact on the wider economy in measuring productivity? Because clearly we do want to measure relative success in delivering net zero.
In your talk, you both kind of looked backwards and forwards in terms of the impact that pursuing net zero policies may have had in the past and potentially in the future. So you looked at the lack of productivity growth in the UK since 2008, since the financial crisis. How related do you think this is to the pursuit of net zero policies?
I think that there appears to be a correlation. Okay, I mean, I'm not sure I put it more strongly than that, because clearly other things are going on, but certainly there appears to be a generalized correlation between net zero policy and economy-wide productivity in a sample of countries, including the UK, and there also appears to be a specific effect within energy sectors, namely electricity and gas, where the effect that I mentioned, the fact that output is actually declining and inputs, particularly renewable capacity, is going up, and that does seem to be associated with a measured decline in TFP in the electricity and gas sectors.
Okay, when we look at the economy as a whole, do you think it's possible for the economy to grow as it has in the past, given the imperative to get to net zero? Is that possible?
Yeah, it's clearly possible, but I think it's important to say it's challenging. So it depends whether we're talking about the whole economy or talking about energy sectors in particular. I think in energy sectors in particular, it's more than challenging, because the projections are that outputs will rise a bit, but inputs will rise potentially a lot. So it's quite difficult to see in the short run how that can result in anything other than a productivity decline. So the work that I was talking about was specifically in electricity. What you see in the basic output-input statistics for projections of the electricity sector are output of electricity doesn't rise that much to begin with, but inputs rise significantly faster. Then it might be at some point in the 2030s, the outputs rise more quickly as we have more extensive electrification, and because we've made some of the investments in additional capacity, we see the inputs growing more slowly, and hence productivity becomes much more positive then. For the whole economy, I think it depends on, the ongoing challenges of the service economy because I think that certainly you would expect any part of the economy that's material dependent, net zero is going to put pressure on productivity increases there.
So what do you think the work you've done, particularly on the energy networks and the electricity and gas sectors, has for, I guess, almost some of the more challenging sectors to decarbonise in terms of measurement of output? So, for example, for transport or for heat, what would you say what lessons can you learn from the work you've done on the energy sector?
Well, I suppose what I was trying to say today was that we've already seen the, if you like, the peak use of energy in the UK. So, the peak use of energy occurred sort of around 2005 for both electricity and gas, and underlying demand has been declining relative to increasing population. That means we've already had a sort of foretaste of net zero in the statistics of what's been happening since around 2005, and that's why, not surprisingly, we see this decline in productivity. I think that trend is likely to continue and only get more severe as you head towards net zero in the electricity and gas sectors.
You made the point in your talk that when you try and control for some of the wider externalities associated with the generation of power, that they sometimes they may only have a small effect if you do try and control for them. So I was struck by that. Do you think that's because we're not measuring them very well? We don't value them in the right way? They would have a bigger impact if we were more accurately able to value the cost that they actually represent.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I distinguish between two things I was talking about. I was talking about quality of service and quality of service as well as emissions. I think in quality of service we have seen some quite big improvements in quality of service, particularly for electricity customers in terms of reduced customer minutes lost, and that is actually quite valuable. I showed that does actually make quite a bit of difference to measure productivity if you include it properly. The problem with a lot of these quality of service measures is, of course, they're bounded. You can only improve quality of service to a certain level, and then you've got the perfect or the maximally efficient quality of service. You see big improvements initially as you deliver quality of service benefits, but actually they must exhaust. And part of the issue with looking forward is it's going to be challenging to maintain even existing levels of quality of service in some of the energy sectors. The point I was making about emissions was that if you attribute emissions directly to particular subsectors in energy, actually the attributed emissions are not that big and therefore not that valuable. So a whole economy decarbonisation might see quite a lot of carbon taken out of the economy, might see a relatively big improvement in ecosystem services, but actually can you attribute that to a particular sector, or is it just accruing to the whole of GDP? So I was just looking at the carbon being saved by the operation of the electricity and gas networks, which is actually a very small part of CO2, and that has very little impact. But even if you scale it up to the whole economy, the value of all carbon currently being produced by the UK economy, isn't that valuable relative to conventional GDP.
Yeah, there's some interesting conversations here, I suppose, about the territorial versus consumption emissions, obviously, that our economic activity generates. I was struck as well, you talked about the UK industrial strategy, such as it has been, and this idea that that we can have green growth. that we can, both decarbonise our economy whilst growing it. What do you think policymakers generally mean when they talk about green growth, or is this one of the issues that's not well defined?
I think, yeah, that's a great question to think about, isn't it? I think what they mean is a sort of, I think they generally mean some green policies which are then combined with some regional industrial policy. So if you think about things like promoting offshore wind in somewhere like Hull, that is that is really about promoting a regional industrial policy in northern town, which is in play politically. Is it seriously about promoting economy-wide productivity? I don't think so, because these sectors are never going to be that significant to promote economy-wide productivity. And I made the point about Denmark that yes, it's true that green exports from Denmark are quite significant. Maybe the 20%, more than 20% of all Danish exports. But Denmark is a small country, and I don't think there's any suggestion that the UK will become a major green exporter to the extent that it would revolutionise a UK productivity. Because the reason for that is, it's all about comparative advantage, and it's not clear that we're going to hit scale in many of these green industries in the same way that other countries such as China or Germany already have.
So what do you think your research means for economic measurement and the circular economy? Because there's a lot of challenges there to measure things properly.
I think, well, as with all issues in productivity measurement, better measurement is important. We need to measure both outputs and inputs better. Clearly, with outputs, we want to measure quality measures carefully and in a quantifiable way, and we want to work much harder on deflators and appropriate deflation of financial measures of both inputs and outputs. And it's clear that there are a lot of issues to do with how we deflate financial values, and it's not clear that we can explain how some of the deflators actually relate to underlying physical quantities of inputs and outputs. At the moment, I made the point that it appears to be the case that deflated output in energy sectors hasn't been declining, whereas the statistics on actual energy show that it clearly has. So one sort of wonders what's going on with some of the deflators there.
Yeah, absolutely. I could talk about deflators all day, but I'll just move on to my final question, which is, I suppose some might say, well, why does this matter? If there's this decline in productivity, TFP in the energy sector, or even in the whole economy as we move to net zero, does that matter? Why is that important, given the imperative to decarbonise the economy?
Yeah, I mean that's a really strong question, isn't it? I think GDP gets a very bad press, and I think that's not entirely fair, is it? Because the bigger your GDP, as I made the point in the lecture, the more you can borrow, and borrowing is actually really important for dealing with smoothing current consumption and for dealing with distributional issues. So what we measure actually does matter, and it is real impacts. And I think it would be very unfortunate, wouldn't it, if the UK were a leading country in net zero policy, but was seen to have declining GDP growth and declining total factor productivity, and that wouldn't exactly sell net zero to other countries. So I think we owe it to ourselves and we owe it to our population to measure these things better so that we can rightly show that there is a benefit from pursuing net zero policies, and equally keep a proper eye on whether we are delivering them in a productively efficient way. Because that is the other corollary. You know, some people would argue, oh, it doesn't matter, we need to deliver net zero. But as good economists, we want to say, no, we want to deliver net zero in the most efficient way possible.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Michael. Fascinating.
Thanks, Marie.